James Comey's story in Washington has some striking parallels to a firestorm in Florida. Before Comey and Trump, we had Bailey and Scott.
The attacks against me are absolutely untrue and they're ridiculous.
And so we'll show you how the situation in Florida gives us some clues into how the situation in Washington will play out. Plus, we'll show you how this mother from Jacksonville inspired state lawmakers to pass big changes to our self-defense laws.
Fired it.
Fired it where?
More towards him, but it hit the wall.
How is that a warning shot?
So it could have been a deadly shot.
And with the drama over the legislature's special session, we'll break down their history of squabbles, contradictions, and blunders. This is Money, Power, and Politics. Well, first, state leaders worked behind closed doors to switch some money around in the state budget, and then they got blistered for backroom dealing, and then they got caught up in bickering and an impasse they could not break until Friday afternoon with an announcement to expand the special session. This fits a pattern of dysfunction, and we're about to show you how this goes way back in time, but we'll start with our roundup of follies from a particularly shameful moment this year.
Sometimes, people get heated and arguments happen.
That was Senator Frank Artillas trying to downplay a racist, sexist rant in which he hurled the N-word at his African-American colleagues.
It happens with other senators, just not myself.
Oh, he resigned. And before he quit, he voted and voted again by pushing an African-American colleague's button while she was away from her desk.
Because I gotta go to Democratic meeting.
This could be the iconic image of Florida, not to be confused with this iconic image of Florida, of a state that's bungled elections on the national stage a time or two, electing lawmakers who vote a time or two, either with their colleagues' permission to make it look as if they were at their desk doing their jobs, as Artillas may have done, or sometimes without their colleagues' permission to steal their votes.
I would say more than 100 times, I would imagine.
Votes without permission?
Yes. I, in fact, saw a non-member hit someone's button. And I thought, oh my gosh, has it gotten that bad?
It's gotten pretty bad. And that's saying something for a state legislature with a knack for embarrassing us through the years. From the time they declared freedom from the press and locked the public out of a healthcare meeting to chants of liberty.
Liberty! You think the taxpayers liberty! Liberty!
To the time they cracked down on sex in public park bathrooms and wound up busting the House sponsor of the crackdown on sex in public park bathrooms, soliciting sex in a public park bathroom.
I wish this situation to no one.
Only in Florida could a Senate leader skip work for an out-of-town barbecue.
The business of the Senate concluded early today,
while her colleague voted for her, making it look as if she was still on the job.
I can understand how they may say that it looks sloppy.
Well, speaking of sloppy, maybe this could be the image of our government at work.
Did you have anything to drink tonight? No?
That's Representative Kerry Pigman. Before his DUI arrest this year, he serves on House Oversight and Government Accountability.
I'm a state representative.
He later apologized for embarrassing himself and others.
Okay? You okay? You all right?
It was his fellow Rep. Dane Eagle who came up with the idea of testing lawmakers to make sure they're not on drugs.
When I ran for class president in high school, I was drug tested. Now that I represent 160,000 people in the Florida House of Representatives, I'm not.
But that was before his DUI arrest. So looking at the legislature's history, what more can you say?
I think Jay-Z said it best, and I'm going to quote for you. I know my rights, so you're going to need a warrant for that.
Well, this year, our lawmakers promised a new era of accountability and the most transparent process in legislative history. Then they had a racial slur scandal. Then the leaders negotiated the budget in secret, cut more backroom deals, passed a budget, went home, again ordered lawmakers back into special session at taxpayer expense to change the budget after more backroom negotiations. Sounds kind of like that year they declared freedom from the press.
Liberty!
One thing that makes this place work is people got to be able to talk to each other a little bit and at least understand where we are. So.
You can't do that with the reporters present?
Well, it shows it puts a little different light on things when all the lights are on and the camera's on.
Yeah, they missed the part about how politicians derive their power from the consent of the governed, and we can't grant that consent if we can't hear or see what they're doing. And how we rebelled from a king and demanded liberty for a free and open government that in Florida too often works behind closed doors to keep you in the dark.
Liberty!
You think the taxpayers
Liberty!
should have some
Liberty!
You think the taxpayers
Now, this week, the legislature also sent the governor a bill to change our controversial Stand Your Ground law. The governor has a big decision to make on this, so we'll show you what's at stake in tonight's We the People.
Breaking news tonight, one man dead, another in a jail cell after a shooting in Sanford.
The neighborhood watch captain, George Zimmerman, is now in custody.
Why does this defendant get out of the car if he thinks that Trayvon Martin is a threat to him? Why? Because he's got a gun.
The George Zimmerman trial was a flashpoint on guns, race, and Florida justice.
No justice, no peace.
Protests and marches continue today across the country.
But to all the protesters who said it showed how our self-defense laws favor the shooter, meet Merissa Alexander.
Put George Zimmerman in Marissa's shoes, he probably would have been convicted with a 2-day trial.
This mother from Jacksonville could not follow the Zimmerman case much at the time because she was serving a 20-year sentence, she says, for standing her ground without shooting anybody.
The worst was when I was pregnant.
Back in 2010, she said her estranged husband beat her.
He headbutted me. I remember my shirt being ripped. He threw me over a bed.
Threw you over a bed?
Yeah.
When you were pregnant?
Mm-hmm.
So she got a restraining order. Then 9 days after she gave birth to their little girl, her husband showed up.
He said he'll kill me.
She ran into the garage, but says she could not leave.
The garage wouldn't go up. I didn't have my key. It was unbelievable. It was like something out of a movie.
She took the gun she legally owned, walked back into her own home, and says she fired a warning shot into the wall to scare him away.
I was in fear, and so I thought this is the best I could do.
And that's how Merissa Alexander got that 20-year sentence.
I know I'm not getting ready to do 20 years.
No, the verdict was thrown out in 2013 because the jury got bad instructions. But instead of seeking 20 years at her new trial, the state demanded more.
60.
Beg pardon?
60 years.
60 years?
Yeah.
So facing 60 years for firing what she calls a warning shot, she took a plea deal, served her time, and got released. And now her story is driving that hot debate at the Capitol over our Stand Your Ground law.
That choice that I made that day, I wouldn't change it. It was the best I could do.
So state lawmakers and the gun lobby have a plan to make it easier to claim self-defense. Instead of the shooters having to prove they were in fear for their lives, prosecutors would have to prove they were not.
Anytime the state charges you with a crime, they have the burden of proof, all the way from arrest to the jury room.
But as Marissa's story inspires this push for change, there's something we left out. What if we told you her ex-husband claimed she struck him, and he had a picture of his swollen eye, and that warning shot flew into the wall behind him?
Fired it.
Fired it where?
More towards him, but it hit the wall.
How is that a warning shot?
Well, it could have been a death. It could have been a deadly shot.
And under the proposed changes, she may not have even gone on trial. And even she says those Stand Your Ground changes could encourage more shootings.
Will it encourage some vigilantism? Sure, I'm sure it will.
State lawmakers have a lot to think about as they put our law on trial at the Capitol, and they serve as jury.
There are plenty of Merissa Alexanders out there. Plenty.
Coming up, Russian hackers targeted Tampa Bay area election managers just before the election. We'll explain how they did it and how we stopped them. Last year, Russian hackers tried to trick Tampa Bay area election managers with an email scheme. It did not work, but Merissa Lynn, you dug into the scheme and what we all can learn from it.
Well, first of all, phishing emails are actually the norm these days. We all get them. The Pasco County Supervisor of Elections told me he receives around 2,000 phishing emails a week. He received one a week before the 2016 election, and that was a Russian attempt to hack Pasco's computer system. Pasco County Supervisor of Elections Brian Corley recalls the October 31st phishing email. It said it came from VR Systems, a vendor that sells voter registration software. It claimed to have an update, but it was from a Gmail account, not associated with VR Systems at all.
When elections begin the cycle, you don't have vendors send you updates. That was, I recall that specifically because early voting had already started in Florida, you wouldn't be getting an update to a manual. That just does not happen in our business. We would have gotten it months in advance.
The second red flag the email raised, Corley said, was a misspelling of the word modernized. So Corley did not click on the infected attachment. Flash forward to this week when a federal contractor leaked classified documents detailing a Russian military cyber attack on U.S. voting software. Pasco was a county targeted in the 2016 election.
There clearly appeared to be an attempt. It didn't work. My colleagues and I around the state and our staff followed the protocols to ensure that we had a good election, and I can 100% guarantee you that the election administration, as it relates to votes being tabulated, was 100% rock solid.
A double click of that attachment could have led to a domino effect of sorts.
Once they have entrance now onto your network, onto your computer, now they can typically go and spread out virally around other machines and start to look and hunt for things.
Cybersecurity expert Steve Hasselbeck says while hackers may not have gotten the information they were looking for, they may have taken away the American people's trust in the system, an unintentional win for them.
It really is a trust thing for America, not just for Florida. If they can get into those systems, they can instill a level of doubt.
Eroding voter confidence is a huge concern, because if people don't think their vote counts, in that there's shenanigans, that keeps me up at night.
Yikes. So does VR Systems actually count the votes?
No, it only helps voters check into the polls. So if hackers had been successful, they may have been able to take off names off those voter rolls. But Corley said anyone affected could have cast a provisional ballot.
Thank you. Very fascinating. Coming up, I'll give you my take on Comey's testimony and how history shows us where this is going based on a similar case right here in Florida. Well, the president said he did not demand loyalty from Comey, but even if Comey's account is 100% correct, obstruction of justice may be a stretch. Well, former FBI Director James Comey told the story of a president who did something inappropriate. A president should not press an FBI director for loyalty and should not tell him he hoped that he lets go of an investigation of a former advisor. Democrats and Republican leaders agree that is inappropriate.
No, I mean, obviously, I don't think that is. And yes, FBI directors are supposed to be independent. That's something that's very, very critical.
But remember, the president has said a lot of things that can be construed as inappropriate. You can add inappropriate conversations with Comey to the list without expecting him to face obstruction of justice. History shows us how this Trump-Comey thing will likely play out. In fact, we have a case with some striking parallels right here in Florida with Governor Scott.
The attacks against me are absolutely untrue, and they're ridiculous.
Scott is the state's chief executive, sort of like Trump here, and FDLE Commissioner Gerald Bailey was the state's top law enforcement officer, sort of like Comey. And Bailey claimed the governor's office pressed him to end an investigation into someone connected to Scott. And he said he resisted and then was ousted, sort of like Comey.
Did you or your staff push him to do things he didn't want to do?
So Scott faced the same kind of heat and questions as Trump did 2 years ago.
Why won't you answer the question, sir?
You did force him out, did you not?
Very much. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
The Attorney General even questioned where the laws were broken, and the cabinet members claimed they were misled about the circumstances of the ouster. Sound familiar?
We were misled as to the timing and the process.
So then what happened after the cabinet expressed all that concern?
My job is to be sure that FDLE is protected.
Well, let's just say they let it slide, and they promptly redirected to other stuff. We're going to continue to follow up with you after the meeting. The other cabinet members, thank you for making yourself available this morning.
After that, though, we will have a dog up for adoption.
So now the president still has to deal with a broader investigation of Russia and his own campaign, and we don't know where that will ultimately lead. But as it relates to his interactions with Comey, Trump may be able to take his lumps on this and have both sides say it was inappropriate and then move on, just as Rick Scott did. And he may also be able to weather his contradictory statements, just as Scott has for the past 6 years.
It'll be the 700,000, plus what would be normal.
It's on top of that. On top of what normal growth would be.
I don't know who said that.
700,000 on top of.
No.
But of course, the danger for Trump is that the distractions will continue to sap the political capital he needs to get stuff done. And that's a prescription for a weak chief executive who gets challenged and picked at, even from his own party, just as we've seen right here in Florida.
Oh, gosh.
Meanwhile, the president keeps drawing comparisons to Richard Nixon, so we want to take a closer look at how well that comparison really holds up. So Evan Axelbank is standing by with Nixon biographer John.
Mr. Farrell, John, if I may, can you just talk about what some of what the qualities were that Richard Nixon had that led him on the path to this near impeachment and to the resignation?
The original title for the book, the working title, was Richard Nixon, An American Tragedy, because I was struck as I did the research that people like Henry Kissinger or Elliot Richardson would be writing in their diaries or talking to people during Watergate and saying, you know, this just reeks of a classic Greek tragedy or Shakespearean tragedy.
If you talk to those who have profiled Donald Trump in today's era, President Trump, you often hear similar descriptions. Is that so? And do you see parallels between their two characters?
There are some parallels. Trump certainly tried to take advantage of the Nixon comparison during the fall when he purposely used words like silent majority and law and order, which are associated with Nixon from the 1968 campaign. They both have an ability to see in their audience and to reach out and tap in their audience feelings of grievance and resentment.
What about this idea that the media is our enemy? One of the things that you describe in the book is that Richard Nixon says that the media is not to be trusted and basically says, you know, they're against me. It certainly seems like Donald Trump feels the same way.
Well, both of them, it's ironic in that both of them use the media to climb up to positions of great influence, and then when the media turned on them, the sort of feeling of bitterness and betrayal was twice as searing and led them both then to engage in these wars with the press, right down to the famous phrase of Nixon's, which was in the middle of the Christmas bombing of North Vietnam, he takes time out in the tapes. You can hear him giving Henry Kissinger this lesson, which is the press is the enemy, the press is the enemy. Write it on your blackboard, Henry, the press is the enemy. And of course, very similar to the words that Trump used when he said that the press is the enemy of the people.
Talk of similarities really grew when Donald Trump fired the FBI director Comey. Is there a parallel to that and the Saturday Night Massacre?
The whole scandal in both cases begins with a break-in at the Democratic Party headquarters. In Trump's case, it's a electronic break-in. In Nixon's case, it's a physical break-in. So there are many similarities. But the thing that could get Trump in trouble, past you and I talking about all these coincidences, is the firing of the FBI director who was directing the investigation into whether or not the Russians tampered in our election last fall. And this was very comparable to the firing of Archibald Cox, the special prosecutor, in 1973 by Richard Nixon. I still think that even after all this, if he could get his ship in order, that he could have a very successful administration, even at this point.
What advice do you think Richard Nixon would give to Donald Trump?
Especially since Nixon did have a chance to see Ronald Reagan operate, that he would tell Trump to get a staff led by somebody like James Baker, who was a great advisor to Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush, and who had a rule which is you cut these scandals off in 48 hours. An allegation comes up, you stand in front of a camera, you say yes it happened, or you provide the proof that it didn't happen, and you end it fast.
John Farrell, the author of Richard Nixon, The Life, a terrific book. Pick it up. I read it. It's fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Evan. Take care.
And thank you, Evan and John Farrell. Flubbed his name first time around, so sorry. Coming up as we honor the anniversary of D-Day this week, we got the untold story from the man who landed there first. Well, this week we remember D-Day. 73 years ago, American soldiers landed at Normandy and drove the Nazis out of France. But you may not know the first American to land on the beach lived and retired right here in Pinellas County in Tampa Bay. And he shared his story just before he passed.
About 80% of the guys in there in that boat were sick, upchucking.
You will not see any pictures of Schroeder in these old films of D-Day.
He got there before the cameras did. In fact, his boat arrived a little too early.
And they were running late on that Air Force schedule, and ours, we were jumping a little ahead of time. They were dropping all these bombs right on the place where we were going in.
So he had to dodge German gunfire and Allied bombs while grounding the boat.
Without getting bombed by our own guys.
As he charged the Nazi fort, machine gun bullets ripped through his arm.
Went through here and when it came out there, and this just blew out.
But he killed the machine gunner and cleared the path to freedom.
You break a hole in the seawall wide enough and clear enough to let the vehicles and the tanks get through.
Schroeder said he had learned how to fight as a child. Bullies used to trap him in holes.
They put me in a damn hole out there in the schoolyard. When the bell rang for everybody to go in the morning, I couldn't get out of that hole.
He said those bullies dulled his fear and drove him to fight. And the Army needed a fearless fighter. And so the colonel stepped up and walked right into the most important battle of our time.
And that was the final interview of Colonel Leonard Schroeder. We interviewed him back in 2008. Folks, that is our show. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week.